I hear the same complaints about metal drums non-stop. They sound fake, they feel programmed, they're like plastic drums in space. And I know that we've all been to one of those live shows where we're questioning if we're even watching a real band, and not in the they're so tight, it's inhuman sort of way. That would be good. No, this is more in the way that what you're seeing and what you're hearing just sounds and feels fake. And the biggest culprit, the single thing that gets called out the most besides tracks, drum triggers. There's this massive debate that's been raging since before we even called it sample replacement. When I was coming up, it was all about triggers. The argument is that using them is a crutch for bad drummers, a shortcut, a way to fake a great performance. In other words, cheating. So today we're going to settle this once and for all. Are drum triggers cheating? Well, the short answer is no, and I'm going to show you exactly why. We're going to dig into the metal-specific history of why they were invented and adopted in the first place. The problem isn't the triggers, it's how they're used. Triggers are tools, and tools are neutral. First things first, you have to understand why triggers became so common in metal, and it's not because a generation of drummers just decided to get lazy. It's physics. As thrash and death took hold in the 80s, the music entered a sonic arms race. Guitarists were down-tuning and diming their distortion, while drummers like Dave Lombardo and Pete Sandoval were pushing tempos to previously inhuman velocities. This created a sonic paradox. When a drummer plays that fast, they physically cannot hit the drums as hard as they were before. Think about it like economy of motion on guitar. To play faster, you have to relax and make smaller, more efficient movements. With drums, the faster you go, the less time the beater has to travel, so the movements get smaller. Smaller movements mean less impact and less volume. But it's more than just volume. When you hit a kick drum lighter, you lose some of that high end, that click and attack that helps it cut through a wall of distorted guitars. What you're left with, both live and on recording, is a wall of mud. A continuous, low-frequency rumble where you can't even tell if the drummer is playing in time. Trying to EQ that high end back in is a losing battle. You just end up boosting cymbal bleed and pedal noise. And since you can't boost what isn't there, that means you have to replace or augment the sound of the beater hitting the drum with something else. And how do you do that? That's where the triggers come in. While mainstream pop and rock acts in the 80s were adopting full Simmons electronic kits for their futuristic look and synthetic sounds, the metal underground was taking a different, more practical path. Metal drums didn't need to sound like a spaceship, they just needed to be heard. The solution had two parts. First, the trigger itself. And if you don't know what triggers are, I'm going to give you a quick rundown. I like to call it a Neanderthal mic. It's a little transducer you slap on a drum like it physically touches the drum head. And when you hit the drum head, it picks up the vibration and spits out a raw signal. It's called a splat, and it sounds like this. That splat gets sent to a drum module, aka the brain, which is part 2. The brain takes the splat and uses it to fire off a sample. Could be anything, a car horn, a fart, or ideally, a drum that you think sounds good. One of the classic setups was the red D drum triggers and the Osiris D4 module. That combo was 90s metal. 12 inputs, super affordable, and packed with those sharp plasticky kicks that sliced through walls of guitar. Remember Spiked? Dan Swanna used that sample on like 70% of his 90s mixes. Or what about Fat City? That's an Andy Sneap classic. But even before that, the techniques that brought this sound to life were first forged in a legendary recording studio in Florida, More Sound Recording in Tampa, Florida. Scott Burns and crew weren't just making records, they were solving problems. And their core method, sample replacement, was born out of two unavoidable problems: inconsistent drummers and tiny budgets. Jim Morris, one of the co-owners of Morris Sound, said that a lot of these drummers were playing just past their actual skill level and couldn't deliver solid takes. And beyond that, there just wasn't the money to spend multiple days getting the perfect drum sound. So they built a workaround. No Pro Tools, no fancy software. They tracked to a click, and then an engineer would sit there with a calculator, manually map the time between snare hits, and program the kicks one by one into a DOS-based sequencer, I think on an Apple IIc computer, and all that to trigger the Osiris D4. And yeah, it was brutal, but it worked. And that's how albums like Blessed Are the Sick or Death's Human have that super tight, punchy drum sound that just cuts. Every hit counted. So, is this cheating? Honestly, I've never understood this argument because anyone who's actually used triggers know that they're the opposite of cheating. When a drummer's fast kicks just sound like a blurry low-end mess, you can't tell how tight they are. Add a trigger and suddenly every hit is exposed. If their timing's off, you'll hear it instantly. Triggers are a microscope, not a safety net. And this idea that the triggers play it for you, that's total horseshit. These things aren't plug and play. You have to dial them in until the module actually responds to your playing the right way. Parameters like gain, velocity curve, decay, crosstalk. You got to get it right. If you get it wrong, the trigger won't fire or will misfire from nearby hits. Either way, your live set will turn into a disaster. Getting it right takes time, patience, skill, and a deep understanding of both your gear and your playing. It's not cheating, it's leveling up. Now, if you want to talk about actual cheating, I've heard some rumors of some bands that mimed their kick drums live, meaning they played a show and you could hear kicks coming through the PA and the drummer was pretending to play the kicks, but they were playing hands only. They were faking their kicks. I don't know if it's true, but I've heard rumors of this. That to me is cheating the audience because they think that you're doing something. They think they're seeing a performance. They think you're playing the drums and you're actually not. Now, even in a situation like that, I can think of a few reasons for why maybe it would be justified. So what if the drummer injured themselves? What if it's 2 hours to showtime, all contracts are signed, it's a big show, and the drummer injures their leg? And if the band cancels the show, they're going to get sued, and there's no time to find a replacement drummer. What then? Everybody has to make their own choices, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and the answers are almost never as black or white as people on the internet would have you believe. And speaking of the live show, the whole obsession with having super precise drums live didn't start because people were in pursuit of perfection. They started because live shows sounded like a total mess. Back in the 80s, producers were dialing in these massive studio drum sounds, gated reverbs, huge room mics, and the bands couldn't get anywhere close to that on stage, especially in arenas. Just imagine the mess. So the solution? Trigger samples off the acoustic kit. Now that's the pop and rock world. For most metal drummers, the reason to use triggers live is pretty simple. They just want to be heard in the first place. And just to kind of back up what I'm saying, here's a quote from Charlie Benante of Anthrax and now Pantera. Like for myself, the reason why I started using triggers back in the day was because of my monitors, because I would spend 3 hours on a sound check trying to dial in the sound of an acoustic drum with a microphone, and it just wasn't happening. I went to triggers for that reason. I grew to love them. I don't think it's cheating at all. I've heard that too. Charlie said it straight. He was trying to hear his drums over the guitars and the monitors and could not do it with a natural kick drum. Triggers solve for that instantly. Another great drummer, Krim, has got the same exact reason for using triggers live, but I'll let him tell you.
I use triggers myself live, and I think they're great. At this point, I think then it's useless to just focus on the microphone because we are physically limited. We will have to use triggers afterwards to make the sound, amplify more.
Krim says the same exact thing. He uses triggers live, thinks they're great, but makes it clear most people use them to solve the volume problem, not to cheat. In fact, he's blunt about it. A trigger doesn't hide bad technique, it exposes it. If your double kicks suck, the trigger will make them sound worse, not better. And another legend, Gene Hoglan, backs this up. He actually sets his sensitivity in his triggers super high so that he's forced to hit harder. And here's a quote from Gene. Yes, a lot of people rag on drummers who use triggers because they don't understand what triggers actually do. Granted, you can set the sensitivity of your triggers to the point where you breathe on them and they make tones, but they also tend to double trigger when you do that. I back my triggers way off the sensitivity. I'm at about 50% now because I want to kick the shit out of the drums to make them perform. Drummers who play live with triggers aren't doing themselves any favors if they're not tight. The kicks will be all over the place and people will be able to tell. And there's other reasons for why people use triggers live. Some of the reasons are purely aesthetic. Hellhammer from Mayhem uses triggers to recreate that massive De Mysterious Don Satanas reverb live. It's a massive cavernous sound, and good luck to you trying to dial that with a mic in a small club. These days, hybrid kits are standard. Some drummers just trigger the kick, others add the snare, some trigger the whole damn thing. You can blend acoustic and electronic sounds, layer effects, or add pads for things like claps, sub bass, or even synths. There are even kick pedals now with built-in triggers. It's not a gimmick, it's just part of the kit. So are drum triggers cheating? Absolutely not. They were adopted out of a brutal necessity to solve a very real engineering problem in metal production. They actually demand more precision from drummers, not less, and like any tool, their effectiveness comes down to the skills of the user. In the right hands or feet, they're a powerful way to achieve clarity, punch, and consistency. In the wrong hands, at best, it can create that sterile, plasticky drum sound we all love to hate, and at worst, it can completely ruin your live show. The debate has largely subsided because the technology has become so ubiquitous that triggered drums are basically just a part of the modern metal sound. So if you want to learn how to use these tools the right way to get powerful, professional sounding metal drums, you need to check out Nail the Mix. We give you the raw multi-tracks from real records by bands like Lamb of God, Gojira, and Opeth, and show you exactly how the pros mix them. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Now stop arguing on the internet and go make some heavy music.